Okay, is everybody in here? Yeah, all right. We're going to get cracking. So we have this amazing panel here. I'm just going to change the slide, sorry guys, so we can see the names of our panelists and the questions that they will be making statements on. Is that good? Are we good? Awesome. So this morning, our panelists are going to begin by making short, succinct statements around the following question. Where's our question? Do I need to... What's the reality? Oh, it's up there. Oh, the slide changed. Thanks, guys. What is the reality of the road we are on to decarbonise our economies and stay under 1.5 degrees? Okay? So first I'm going to introduce our panellist. At the end here we have Tim, and he's the chairman of the German natural gas advocacy group, Erdgas. Is that correct? Yes. Sorry, my German. The future of gas. Thank you very much for being with us this morning. Next to him we have Tibor, and he's team leader of the Renewable Energy and Mobility at DENA, which is the German energy agency. Ah, wonderful. Wisdom has arrived. Woo! Just in time. Yay! Should we give a clap to Wisdom, who's had a terrible morning with taxis? Thank you so much. I will pour you a glass of water in a second, okay. And next to me here we have André, and he is an energy policy expert at Climate Analytics, and he specializes in renewable energy and energy efficiency. Next to me here we have Irina, and she is a long-standing Austrian diplomat and has spent many a time in developing economies, including Brazil and China. And she also founded the Global Forum on Sustainable Energy and is a founder of the Global Women's Network for the Energy Transition. And next to Irina, we have Wisdom. Welcome. Thank you so much. We know it's been an effort making it here this morning, so we appreciate it. And he is the Director of Renewable Energy at the Ministry of Energy in Ghana, so thank you. And finally, on the end but not least, we have Craig, who is, works at the Renewable Grid Initiative and specializes in scenarios in energy systems and energy transition. So he's really done a lot of calculating on really the steps we need to take. So what we're going to do, we are going to start with very short statements from the panel. I have our timer here. This is to remind them, although they have longer than 3 minutes, not much longer. And then we're going to see if they would like to quickly respond to each other's statements, and then we're going to open it up to you guys, and Marika and Joe are going to bring round a microphone, and we'll take like 2 or 3 questions, get the panel to answer, and then maybe another few questions depending on our timing. So I would like to ask Andrej to start and give his point of view on what we need to do.
Hi everyone, good morning. Great to see you here. Having dealt with climate change for quite a while as well, I cannot not mention the IPCC report, the special 1.5 IPCC report that was published in early October this year. It listed a number of issues of going beyond 1.5 warming and a number of reasons to stay below 1.5 warming. But there are also some issues that are quite important, but I think didn't catch enough attention in the public debate. Maybe because they, to some degree, speculative. A few days ago, John Kerry, that some of us are missing, mentioned the impact of millions of refugees, hundreds of millions of refugees that will try to reach Europe because of climate change, because of droughts, because of wars, because of lack of resources. There are other reasons to deal with climate change as far as we can, because there are also numerous benefits of climate change mitigation. We're talking about spending money here in our countries and developing renewables, local renewables, creating jobs in rural areas where they are desperately needed, instead of sending money to countries which may not always share our values. Just think about it when you tank your car again. Saving up to 7 million jobs that are lost because of the air pollution. So we just have to leave the fossil fuel age behind us as soon as we can, because millions of lives depend on it as well. We're talking about lower energy bills, decreasing energy poverty, and so on and so forth. A lot of co-benefits are resulting from climate change. So if climate change was not such an urgent issue to deal with, we would have to get out of fossil fuels as soon as we can. Just stop the habit of burning things to have a decent quality of life. The decreasing cost of renewables was already is taking us in the right direction, but we need to accelerate the travel in the post-fossil fuel age. According to some of the pathways that are compatible with 1.5, we have to fully decarbonize our energy sector by the middle of the century, and by 2060 we have to stop emitting any kind of CO2 emission and any kind of greenhouse gases. There will be very little fossil fuels in the power grid, in the energy grid, or in an energy sector in the middle of the century. We're talking about around 1% of coal, 8% of oil will be left, and around 10% of natural gas should be left according to the 1.5 compatible scenario. But the point is that the energy demand will decrease as well, has to decrease as well. Otherwise, we have to rely on negative emissions. Negative emissions are emissions that we don't really like, but we may rely on them because we are late in tackling the issue of climate change. So just to clarify, also negative emissions are not coal CCS, not natural gas CCS. This is, for example, bioenergy, carbon capture and storage. So there are some other ways to sequestrate emissions, and again, this is not something that we like, but we are late and we have to accelerate the transition to rely as little as we can on the negative emissions. It's also not an excuse to do nothing now, because we have to avoid the negative emissions as much as we can.
Thank you very much. Please, I'd like to hear from Tim next.
Right, thank you. And first of all, thank you for having me here. I think it doesn't really go without saying that someone from the gas industry is sitting on a panel in a renewable conference. I think gas, and we just heard a little bit about it, is certainly one part of the equation for decarbonization. We recently, I'm the chairman of the German Gas Association. We recently did a survey among our member companies, and we asked them what is the biggest challenge for the future if you're doing long-term projects. And in the gas industry, we're always doing long-term projects. 50, 60, 70 years is the time frame that we're thinking in. And they came up with a very clear statement, message back to us. Decarbonization is the biggest challenge and also the biggest opportunity that we are facing, not only here in Germany, but also on an international perspective in the gas industry. And this industry certainly has to find its role in this changing world. We are aware that currently natural gas is a fossil fuel. We're emitting CO2, that's right. However, the big challenge is, and that's something that we're facing, how can we bring the existing system that is fueling currently, for instance, half of the homes in Germany with heat and is accounting for a quarter of the energy consumption in Germany. How can we change such a system so that it becomes carbon neutral, that it becomes, in most cases, also renewable? The challenge is also in Germany quite obvious. Germany is failing to achieve its self-imposed climate targets. We're missing the 40% reduction by the year 2020. The biggest challenges are transport. Here we see rising CO2 emissions, and of course power production. Despite the fact that we have a massive grow-up of renewables, this is indeed quite remarkable. We're still firing a lot of coal. We're firing a lot of lignite to produce electricity, and this is indeed completely destroying our CO2 balance, which will bring us into a position that we're doing these calculations on an annual basis. If you look at the CO2 budget of Germany, it's running out late of March on an annual basis. Or if you look in the future, looking at the question at the 1.5 target, if we burn coal in a manner that we see it today, the CO2 budget of Germany will run out in the year 25, 28. And that will be the point when Germany has to say, yes, we have failed to achieve the 1.5 target. So we have to think about new options, and we have to think about a fuel switch very soon. Because climate protection is, of course, about introducing renewables. It's about increasing the efficiency level, but it is also about switching fuels from lignite to gas. And there, of course, we have to switch also gas from natural gas to renewable gas, which is indeed the long-term story that we're promoting. It's biogas, it's hydrogen, or it might be synthetic methane produced from electricity from solar and wind. We call that power to gas. So we have solutions in place, and we are offering this as a partner to the renewables.
Wonderful, thank you. Now I'd like to hear from Thibault.
Yes, hello, good morning. In my answer, I would like to focus a little bit on the recent developments in the UNICE region, which is mainly 56 member states in the Northern Hemisphere. We recently published a study for the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and we clearly see on the one hand that member states are taking steps to expand the use of renewable energy. But if we compare, for example, supporting schemes, we also see that most member states focus on electricity issues and not on heating issues. This is despite the great potential we see for renewable heating applications in the Northern Hemisphere. So renewable heat remains still a policy-making niche there in this region. We also see that it's a very diverse region. So in 2016, the renewable capacity in the whole region increased to nearly 870 gigawatts in total. So that's almost half of the world's total renewable energy capacity in the electricity sector. But this increase has not occurred in all member states. So not all member states extend their efforts for a sustainable energy pathway. Another study of REN21, also published last year, reveals that 70 countries out of 56 member states just received 0.2% of global renewable energy investments. So that means 1/3 of the United Economic Commission for Europe is still really lagging behind also in terms of renewable energy investments. The dynamic progress of renewables within the region is mainly influenced by the EU and also by the US. And what barriers hinder market development? So it's first the legal and regulatory frameworks, which are often inadequate. It's a distorted pricing of energy commodities due to subsidies, a lack of market liberalization, and absence of public acceptance and poor knowledge about the application potential of renewable energy resources. So, last question, what is needed? Locally appropriate and tailored policy measures. Bear in mind the potential of renewable energy heat in the Northern Hemisphere, and also discuss renewable energy development and energy efficiency as two sides of the same coin. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. And now, to open up our geographic view a little bit, I would like to invite Irina to speak.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to say that renewables are a great success story. And REN21 deserves credit for being a very important factor in making it such a great success story. At the same time, we need to acknowledge that we are not on a road to 1.5 degree warming. Full stop. Just to remind ourselves of the very impressive presentation that Johan Rockström did on Monday with regard to the IPCC 1.5 degree report. Just a week ago, the International Energy Agency came out with their World Economic Outlook, stating that for the second year in a row, again, CO2 increases are happening on a global scale. Sustainable Energy for All just came out a little while ago with a report saying that we are dramatically off track in terms of financing for electricity. It's even worse with financing for cooking access, and financing for coal goes up again globally. So we are not currently moving at the speed we need to move to realize the SDG 7 goal, and even less are we on a good path to move towards the 1.5 degree target. I've been asked to look briefly at China and Brazil, two countries in which I served as Austria's ambassador. China, if you read REN 21 reports, has been a leader in the field for renewables over the last years consistently when we look at added installed capacity and when we look at investment for renewables. China has a general drive for blue skies, as they call it, for domestic reasons. Air pollution is very bad. China has a growing middle class, and that middle class is satiated with consumer products. They now want higher quality of life, and the environment is one of them. So based on these domestic constraints and pressures, I'm very confident that China will continue to drive an energy transition nationally, and will also fulfill its climate change commitments. This is also what the International Energy Agency assumes will happen in China. Brazil, another major country when it comes to energy, also has a fairly good energy landscape. 45% of primary energy supply in Brazil come from renewable energy. 80% of the installed capacity for electricity comes from renewable energy. Most of it is hydro, of course, but also non-hydro is growing. And 2018 was the year in which the first gigawatt of installed capacity for solar was reached in Brazil. Hydro in Brazil, you all know it, has a lot of discussions regarding Amazon, destruction of primal forests, living spaces for the indigenous people, etc. But there's also a lot of old hydropower plants, existing hydropower plants, which could be upgraded, leading to very high efficiency gains. Brazil is also a leader, has been a leader for many years on ethanol in transport. So, you know, there are good things happening in Brazil as well. My fourth point, though, is that as a community, and I think this academy has been very successful in contributing to making this community even more stronger, we need to do more of what we do well faster. That's the first point. The second point is we do need to do some things differently, and we need to do some things better. You know, communicating, a good example of the lead into this day's discussion, great communication techniques. We need to use them, but we also need to define the target groups. You know, I would like to say that I don't think a coloring book will help us a lot in a corporate boardroom. It will help us, though, in reaching out to young people. And one of my points is that we need to reach out to young people. We need to reach out to more women. It was mentioned that we created a group, an NGO working specifically to promote women for the energy transition, to bring in more women into the discussions on energy at all levels, in all regions, in all countries, to accelerate the energy transition. And we need new partners to reach those that are necessary to make these changes outside the bubble. Any bubble is comfortable, but we need to move outside the bubble on transport, for example. Where are the leaders on transport issues today? Or where are the leaders on urban planning today? Those are the ones that we need to engage and need to develop the new programs. One example that I like to close with at the international scale, and at a very, very huge international scale that I think we could all try to use for promoting renewables, is the Chinese initiative on revitalizing connectivity between Asia and Europe. It's known under the new Silk Roads, the Belt and Road Initiative in the Chinese terminology. We are talking about infrastructure needs that are unmet along these routes in the order of 1.7 trillion estimated by the Asian Development Bank, US dollars that is. So huge amounts. If this investment goes mostly, primarily, almost 100% into carbon neutral infrastructure, it will make a huge difference for good. If it doesn't, it will lock us into bad brown infrastructure for 50 years to come. So this is something where a lot of people need to work together to make sure that procurement rules are changed in countries that receive these projects, to make sure that common standards are elaborated, to make sure that the financing institutions become more and more attuned to the possibilities of carbon neutral infrastructure and enforce basically this agenda. We need new lifestyles to emerge, and these new lifestyles also need to be worked at with many different communities. I don't have the time to elaborate on that, but I want to close by just saying we cannot just focus on technology change. Renewables also require social justice. They also require behavioral changes. And that is something we need to perhaps pay more attention to. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's also something that perhaps you could bring to the table discussion following on from this panel discussion. All very important. I would now like to invite Wisdom to give his statement. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, let me start by saying that climate change is a reality. And today we are all experiencing the effects of climate change. If you look at the news all over, you see something relating to climate change. But what is the implication to Africa and the developing countries? Implications as far as poverty eradication is concerned, as far as stimulating economic growth and industry is concerned. What is the implication? Take most African countries, our per capita consumption is less than 200 kilowatt hours per month, compared to Germany, for instance, which is about 7,000 kilowatt hours a month. Just 2% or 1% drop or transition, moving the coal that is used here, just 1% of it, shifting it to use in Africa. Can you imagine how it would transform that country? Africa has a lot of resources. We have oil, we have gold, we have bauxite. But think of it. We ship coal from Africa to Europe to produce electricity, move cocoa beans from Africa to Europe to produce chocolates, and bring back to Africa to sell. I mean, how can we transform this energy transition such that we have a fair equilibrium? There should be fairness in the system. Renewable energy has a role to play in Africa, especially as far as access is concerned, as far as decentralized electrification is concerned. But if we have to improve and achieve the SDG goal of poverty alleviation, we need to use energy to stimulate economic growth. And that is what Africa needs. Renewable can play a role, but I strongly believe that the conventional energy options also has a significant role to play. Just move 1% of your energy used here to be used in Africa, and it can turn Africa around, and we will have adequate equilibrium as far as eradicating poverty is concerned, as far as creating more jobs is concerned. And if there is job, most African countries will not be struggling to run to Europe in search of greener pasture, which is not even there. So there should be a balance in the equation. And if that balance is there, I believe that there will be a smile on all of us. Industrialized countries should reduce their emissions, but there should be a transition to get Africa step up in its energy use. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That was very inspiring. And finally, Craig, we'd like to hear your statement. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. I'd like to also reflect on the past 3 days because I've been here the entire time. We began, and this incidentally has been a great event for me. I have learned a lot from the people in this room. We began with some presentations on climate change, which were a bit scary, and now we're talking about it again this morning. What's interesting for me is in the middle there, what were the topics that you wanted to discuss? You wanted to discuss things like jobs. That's what these people were talking about. You wanted to talk about injustice, democratizing the energy sector, fighting corruption. I find that interesting because these are the co-benefits, of course, of climate change mitigation. And when we ask ourselves, how can we move more quickly? One way to do that, of course, is by talking about issues that affect people today. I can get people motivated better to fix the world in 2018 and 2019 than in the second half of the century, right? People really need to fix those problems today. And the reason we need to move very quickly is Andre mentioned this IPCC study on 1.5 degrees that came out last month. If you look at the models there, if you look at the scenarios, they go into negative emissions in the second half of the century. Now, what you have to understand about modeling is when you begin to model a scenario, you put in your best assumptions, and if they don't get you where you want to go, then you start putting in your hopes. And this is a bit scary because the things that we are hoping our children will come up with in the second half of the century, they don't always seem to have co-benefits. Some of them look like they could have negative impacts. So they're just possibly going to cause other problems. So I find it inspiring, and I hope that you continue to do the kind of work that you do here, to focus on fixing things like clean cooking, focus on developing business opportunities in rural areas. I think you and I very much agree that we need to address economic development in Africa. Maybe we would disagree on the ways that I'm not so sure that we can afford the conventional energy if you're just going to have, in the second half of the century, more climate change to deal with. But we can discuss that, of course. But I would say that to move as quickly as possible so that we don't need these imaginary backstops that might not work and are based on breakthroughs, we should focus on fixing people's problems today, and we will get the climate change mitigation as an outcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like us all to give a round of applause to our amazing panelists this morning. That was so inspiring. Okay. Before I open up to questions from you guys, because I'm sure you've got lots of questions you'd like to ask, would you guys like to respond to each other's statements at all? No? Awesome, that means more time for you. So Marika, my lovely co-facilitator here, has this amazing throw around microphone. So I would like to start with 3 questions. We're going to collect 3 questions, and then we're going to get a panel to respond, and then we'll go again. So I think Erin has a question. Let me write this down, hang on. Go on, you've got it. That's your microphone. Speak. Yes. It wasn't just for fun.
Okay, yes. So thank you all for the very interesting contributions and reflections on the week. For the Honorable Director of Renewables from Ghana, Mr. Wisdom, I wanted to highlight that you mentioned a number of resources, but you did not mention sun and wind and water, and the most renewable of all of Africa's resources is human resources. The people that need the jobs, the people that are developing the new generation of businesses, etc. And I work for the Africa Mini Grid Developers Association. It's a new industry association of mini grid companies who are focused on bringing jobs and electricity to the rural areas. And I just wanted to mention that we are here to work with you because we really feel that most of Africa's future jobs and resources are in the countryside. The urbanization that is happening is of course inevitable, but we're really focused on bringing opportunities to the countryside. And I just wanted to let you know that there are partners out there who are really looking forward to working with countries around the continent on bringing new types of renewable technology to new areas. And that, yes, conventional power will be necessary, but conventional power is generally big. And then it's easy, like I live in East Africa, and Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Kenya are all going to be power exporters in the next 5 years. But they're only going to be exporting giant power lines over the villages to one another. And they will be exporting power, but they still cannot serve their own people. So, the conventional power is important, but it's important for big industry. But the majority of Africans are still living a small-scale life, and there's really great renewable 21st century technologies that can help partner with governments and deliver on that side of things as well. So I want to make that.
Thank you very much. We have another gentleman here. Would you please stand up and throw the cube? It's soft. You won't hurt each other. Thank you.
Okay. So, thank you for organizing the presentation. I just try to come back to the main question which you were about to answer. How is the reality on staying below 1.5 degrees? And in some of your statements, I heard more or less clearly, some of you believe that we need something, you call it fuel shift. And my question then would be quite focused, how can we believe that it's possible to stay below 1.5 degrees with the urgency which we hear here and in other situations, as long as we talk about replacing one very dirty fossil fuel by another not quite so dirty fossil fuel? We are talking about, and I would like an answer from some of you, we're talking about moving the whole system to renewables, only renewables as quickly as possible. And so talking about any bridge technology, this would be my statement, is just somehow throwing sand in the eyes of those who should see.
Thank you very much. One more question, and then we'll come back to the panel. This gentleman here had his hand up first. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's very interesting that we've got a title here, under 1.5 degrees, because the industries that I'm working in, 2 degrees is a push. An ambition to get as close to 1.5 as much as possible is great. I wanted to actually touch on what Wisdom said there, but maybe expand that a little bit with a question. We're hearing a lot of positivity coming from Europe, and yet we have exported the vast majority of our emissions to the developing world, specifically China. And I'm just wondering, you know, if we are to bring maybe part of those emissions back into Europe, which is a trend that is developing, how are we going to cope with that aspect of the world? Plus, you know, in shipping, there's a real resistance to that because obviously we make our money by shipping the goods, not bringing the factories back. So there's a great resistance within the vested interest to actually minimise that return back to Europe and other developing countries.
Thank you so much. Right, so we're just going to get our panel to respond. So first of all, Wisdom, would you like to respond to Aaron's point that in Africa, if you build lots of base load, rather than thinking about some bringing energy to develop the more rural areas, and would like your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, I must appreciate that renewable energy has a very important role to play as far as providing base load is concerned, providing energy for lighting, basic operating TV, refrigerators, etc. But when it comes to stimulating economic growth, when it comes to industrialization in Africa, we need the big powers. You can't rely on solar to turn our bauxite into alumina. Neither can you rely on solar to turn our iron ore, which is underneath there, into iron. You need some amount of energy. Just think of it. Why export all the oil that is in Africa to Europe to produce and then export the resources we have in Africa in its raw state, use fossil fuel to transport it to Europe, add value to it, and bring it back to Africa? If that can be done locally, I think that is where I'm coming from. Yes, we need the renewables, but we also need the conventional energies to add value to the abundant resources that Africa has. If we do that, there could be a fair equilibrium. Most of us came here by air. Most of us came here by car. We use fossil fuel. We didn't use donkey carts. So if it's good, what is good for the goose should be good for the... once it's good for Europe, it should be good for Africa as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on to the second point. Some people on the panel have been saying, why are we talking about replacing one dirty fuel with one not quite so dirty fuel, when really we should just be going all out for energy efficiency and renewable energy? So how are we going to do that? And I think you'd like to begin.
Yes, just another point on Africa, on the question to Wisdom. I think here in Europe we have a certain disadvantage, and that's our politicians. Coming from Poland, originally I know what I'm talking about. The main challenge are the politicians with the mindset of the 1970s. Big is beautiful and needs to burn a lot of things. And this is the advantage of Africa. This mindset in many cases don't exist there. You will not compete with Europe, you will not compete with China in the industries in which they have been for decades. You have to develop new technologies. There is a major progress that Africa had on, for example, mobile phones. You didn't have to have landlines. You skip this phase. And I think some countries have this advantage that you can skip the fossil fuel age and be the leader in the new technologies. Just think about where did South Korea decide to develop iron ore or technologies that where the chances would be relatively small, and it was already very crowded. Also wanted to refer to the 2 degrees and /1.5. Well, we have a commitment, we have Paris Agreement, and the goal is clear. It's well below 2, and pursuing effort to limit the climate change to 1.5. It's challenging, no doubt about it, but we cannot undermine the achievement that was reached in Paris and that was ratified by almost all countries on the planet. So it's not about 2 degrees, it's about well below 2/1.5. And about moving away from fossil fuels, yes, I'm not quite sure how moving away from a dirty fuel to a less dirty fuel will help us to reach German goals. The first point, the fact that Germany may miss its 2020 goal it's depressing to me. I was always taking German as example to my Polish colleagues, and now I'm not looking very smart doing that. So I have to take different countries, including some developing and least developed countries who are accelerating action on that as well. So that's something to point out to. Germany has to meet 2020 targets, otherwise it's not good.
Maybe I add a little bit to the answer regarding the fuel fit, because that is indeed a point which we're trying to promote quite intensively. If I look at the energy mix in Germany, a kilowatt hour from lignite is 3 times more carbon intensive than a kilowatt hour coming from natural gas. So switching from coal to gas reduces CO2 emission by 70%. And we would be stupid not using this opportunity here. We would be very stupid not using this opportunity. Also, in regards to the buildup of renewables in the light of the energy transition. Because if I talk to the population, if I look at how the general opinion is, if we're not able to show results in terms of CO2 reduction, and the German energy mix isn't moving actually down its CO2 footprint, if we're not moving the CO2 average, the whole effort in moving towards renewables is not really appreciated by the population. The support will go back, and we will not see any real backing of the energy transition. Second point is, when we're talking about the switch to gas, we're not talking about a lock-in situation in a fossil fuel. We have an infrastructure in place which is able to distribute not only fossil fuel, but also biogas. We do that already in massive terms. And in the future, it's able to distribute hydrogen. Hydrogen produced from solar and wind power. We have 30 installations in Germany already where we demonstrate how hydrogen can be injected into the gas grid so that renewable energy, which is still intermittent, can be used in days when there is no wind and we don't have light. We can bring sun, which is a scarce resource in Germany, from the summertime to the wintertime, using the massive storage capacity of the gas grid. So we are prepared to move into a renewable scenario as well.
Thank you very much. Carrying on this point, I'm going to have Craig and then Irina.
Yes, just briefly on the gas and also on economic development, we're probably not going to have 100% electrification. There will be some role for gas in the future. So, you know, we won't have necessarily batteries in planes or something like that. We can think of a few applications. And that's fine. The only thing that I would like to have everyone remember is that I think what's happening right now is the gas sector is trying to play up the role of gas in order to protect its interests today. And we just need to be careful about that. It's a perfectly legitimate thing for the industry to do. But when we consider what the role of gas should be, it might also be an overstatement as well, even though I don't think we're going to have 100% electrification. The other thing about economic development, Wisdom, you mentioned aluminum. Actually, a lot of aluminum's made with renewable electricity. That's not really a big issue. Now, if you don't have the hydropower, maybe that's the big issue. But aluminum from renewable electricity should work. We have data centers going to Ireland, which has a lot of wind power, and they very much need baseload. We have a lot of data centers also going to Scandinavia, where they need 24/7 electricity, and Scandinavia is going renewable. So there are things that can be done, and we don't need a breakthrough there. I would just say, if I were economics minister, which I'm not, and there's probably reasons for that, I would just say that we should not only focus on the big industry, but also on diversifying the economy, improving entrepreneurship, especially in rural areas. That will also help heal some of the rifts we have where the cities are doing well and the countryside's falling behind. And we can do that with renewables.
Thank you, Irene.
Thank you. I'd like to make 2 quick points. One, in response to the point that was raised about exporting emissions, no? Which Europe has done quite successfully to developing countries. Why China has a chance of implementing a blue sky policy, one of the reasons is that its economy is changing totally. We have a new normal in China, and part of the new normal is, you know, a move away from polluting heavy industries, which are being exported as we speak to other places on the globe, and towards higher-end manufacturing, high technology products, and also service industry. So, and that is something that we can observe in many places, these kinds of changes. So my point, again, is that if we want to influence a stronger movement towards renewables, we have to do it by taking into account the fact that most energy policies will be national energy policies, sovereign national energy policies. So we have to find ways of influencing those that shape these policies, and we can do so only, I believe, by working with them to change what they perceive to be their enlightened self-interest. And that harkens back to changes of behavior, to changes of consciousness, to changes of what lifestyle we emulate, of what it means to live the good life. I'm totally with wisdom in underlining that the current energy system is fundamentally unjust. But I'm not totally with him when he argues that we should try to improve the situation by giving more polluting energy to the developing countries. I think we should improve the situation by giving developing countries a fairer share in a new energy system, and not just a fairer comparative share, but a fair share in the new energy system. And that's a very important point.
Thank you. Yes, Wisdom.
Thank you. Just a quick reaction. Just imagine Europe or Germany if developing countries decide to put a stop on exporting oil and coal to Europe. Can you imagine what will happen as far as your transportation, as far as your electricity issues will be? Now, if we have to look at giving a fairer share, renewable energy in Africa, then let's walk the talk. I have observed with keen interest most of the missions and embassies in Africa. If that is the solution, I expect to see these missions being powered on renewables. But there is not a single one, and I mean not a single one, without a diesel generator, relying on a diesel generator to provide their electricity needs. Yes, still, you tell me, you don't use it, go renewables. And we don't even produce these renewables locally. Let us import, build the economy of the developed countries so that we take it and then we export what we call dirty for you to have an improved life. Let's consider this carefully. We need a fair share.
Thank you very much. I think Tibor also wanted to respond to that.
Yes, I think Irene, for example, also pointed out the importance of the different sectors and trends we see as its challenge also to foster sustainable development in the energy sector. And I think here in Germany, for example, we are entering in the second phase of the energy transition, and at the German Energy Agency, we think in terms of integrated energy transition. So that means thinking all sectors together and also see what are the infrastructures we have in one country and how can we use that to decrease CO2 emissions. So this is one point I would like to make. And the other is, you said we are talking about national energy policies also in the future. I fully agree, but I think also we have one opportunity, and this is giving carbon dioxide emission a price. So carbon tax, the concept, also could help us also to find a new situation, and also in terms of global energy consumption and the price we pay at the end for also economic development.
Thank you. This gentleman here did mention a bit about the fair emissions and bringing them back to Europe. Do you feel like the panel has responded to that, or would you like a bit more response on that? A little bit. Yeah, but is that actually the case that Europe will be bringing them back? I don't think it is, but would anyone here like to comment on that?
Well, there is something to that. It's called carbon leakage. So yeah, that is actually an issue. I think really what we need to do is, someone mentioned leapfrogging. Was it Andre mentioned leapfrogging? I think what we need to do is really sell the idea that the future doesn't need to look like the past. Okay, and I think what Wisdom has said today is very valuable to me in that respect, because it's making me think about how this argument that, well, coal was fine for Europe, and we continue to import oil, and so it's fine for Europe, but everybody else should switch over. I think the reality on the ground here, honestly, is that the debate in Europe is a bit different. We're not really saying that internally. We're actually saying let's get away from coal and get away from oil. But it could really be, my daughter's in South Africa right now for a year, and there's all kinds of things down there that she's discovering people are doing with smartphones that we don't have here. Okay, so there are opportunities there. I don't know what all of them are. I think the Africans know what some of them are, and that's where we need to look for the opportunities. The future won't look like old Europe.
Thank you very much. We have time for 2 more questions from the room. We have 2 gentlemen. Oh, these 2 gentlemen had their hands up first, so I'm sorry, it's going to go there on this table right in front of me. But don't worry, after the break, we're going to carry on our discussions and our tables, and we're going to bring it back to everyone to share afterwards. So this is an amazing conversation, but unfortunately, we can't keep it going all day. So, gentlemen, you could go first.
I wanted to follow up on Irene's comment and point about carbon pricing, which I think is quite unrealistic to think that's going to happen, but there is a lever we can push. And Steve Sawyer mentioned on Monday that governments all talk about change, and governments around the world are continuing to subsidize fossil fuels to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars a year. Now, what can we do about it? The G20 in 2009 signed an agreement that said we're going to phase out subsidies on fossil fuels. And it didn't happen in 2013. The G20 reconfirmed that commitment, and it still hasn't happened. That, we don't need 100% of the countries in the world, we don't need all the signatories to Paris to phase out fossil fuels. We need the G20 to phase out the subsidies. That would be the equivalent of the carbon tax. What can we do about that? Why is the G20 asleep?
Thank you, and to your table.
Thank you. My name is Freddie from Ghana. I want to direct my question to my brother. He said something that I was so happy. He said we should fix the problem now. And our challenge over there is that when you are in a university, even we just learn it in theoretical, no practical, serious practical background. So I am suggesting this renewable energy. We should come down to our country, Africa, set up your base, so that when we learn it in theoretically, we'll come there and do our practical over there, so that we can all help in solving the situation. Also, our rural areas, they are the people who are using firewood, using smokes, using charcoal and all those stuff. But when you come to the country, you only base in Accra. Whilst the typical village where the problem is really happening, they are not coming there. We have a lot of land. You come, you set up your base, your solar farm, we come there, you bring investors, you can make a lot of business, but it's not happening. The university where I lecture, part-time lecture over there, we have a regional maritime university, we have a base where they train all the marine engineers. Because of that base is set up there, a lot of people from all over the country, they come there for training, and it's a big business for people who set up the base over there. So I would like all of you to put this in serious, as my boss is saying, we have the things there, there's nobody to help us. You come and teach us practical, we'll learn in theory and war. Then you take the practical back to you. We need the help so that you can come and improve the system.
Thank you very much. So we're going to first talk about the carbon tax, but actually getting rid of fossil fuel subsidies. And then we'll talk about bringing the technology and the know-how into more rural areas in Africa and how we can support Africa to make that leapfrog so they don't make the same mistakes that we've made in Europe. So first of all, I would like to pass it back to Tim. Oh, would you not? Sorry, I thought you were going to respond. Oh, sorry. Here.
I can just mention a few things about the carbon tax and carbon pricing as such. It is necessary, and then subsidies. It is necessary to price carbon. That's kind of obvious. We keep treating atmosphere as a dump for any kind of pollution, and we need to stop doing that. However, as catchy as the idea of carbon tax is and or carbon pricing, it's just the lowest common denominator. With even a high carbon price, and if we ignore, for example, feed-in tariff support for renewables, there would never be photovoltaic energy, which was much more expensive when it was subsidized, and now it's as cheap as wind energy, and in many cases even cheaper. So we need to have a, well, sometimes chaotic, sometimes quite diverse tools to support different pathways to decarbonize our economy. And getting out of subsidies is a very important element of this puzzle. Just the main point, carbon pricing, lowest common denominator, like we have in the EU, for example, but we do have countries which introduce additional carbon tax, additional charges, and additional supports for clean source of energy. So that will be a little bit chaotic, but that's the way forward, it seems.
Thank you. Irene, you also wanted to mention something.
Well, just on the subsidy question, you know, I started to work in serious on international cooperation for energy in 1999. It's quite some time ago. And at that time, one of the questions that was raised all the time was subsidies for fossil fuels. The other topic that was raised all the time was cooking, you know, modern cooking services. The other topic that was raised all the time, and I harken back to something that you alluded to, is manufacturing of renewable energy equipment in developing countries, in particular in African countries. And we haven't moved on all three of these things. So, you know, why is that? Not because we have known that these are important areas, but because there are very potent obstacles to it. And in the case of the fossil fuels thing, the subsidies, it's vested interest. In the case of cooking, there's no interest among groups of men about how the cooking is done as long as the food is on the table. Sorry for putting it so bluntly. And why are we not manufacturing renewable energy equipment in African countries? You know, I mean, I really need to hear the answer from the African countries. Why are they not doing it? They can if they want. Why are they not doing it? So there are different answers to these questions. But all have a real grounding in the reality in which we live. And if we want to move something, then we have to look for levers, for points of pressure where we can move those different things. And, you know, as this community, we will not be able to do that. So we will have to form alliances with those who actually can.
Thank you very much. Any more thoughts on how we can help our members of our community in Africa and other developing nations to leapfrog our problems? How can we take this technology and support them in developing it locally, local solutions to their local issues, and so they don't get locked in, and as we're facing in Europe, and how to get past that.
Not just local solutions, but local manufacturing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any thoughts?
Yes, I think it takes me back to what I said earlier on. Why is local manufacturing not taking place in Africa? It's simply because, for now, most African countries rely on heavy oil, diesel as their main source of electricity, which is very expensive to support manufacturing. So if the drive or the transition is to rely on solar, wind, these variable energies to produce, let's say, the solar cells and the ingots, it's not there. When you have the cheap power, you can be able to stimulate economic activity. Today, China is almost like the world manufacturer. Why? Because they have cheap power. 75% of their electricity is coming from coal, which is very cheap. And by so doing, they can produce to outwit even prices in Europe. If we are able to get cheap power, we can reactivate industrial growth, reactivate economic activities, and we'll also be there. And that's what I've been trying to emphasize. Cheap power, and if it means producing a little more CO2. Take Germany. Reduce your CO2 emissions or your generation capacity by only 1%. That would take you to more than 500 megawatts. And can you imagine what a 500 megawatt power capacity can transform economic activity in Africa? Think about it.
Thank you very much. I'm afraid we're going to have to round up now, unless there are any final comments from our panelists. Oh, yes, we're going to start.
Well, just as a final remark, I'm always looking at this poster over there, and just want to pick also up something Irene already said. I'm very happy to be here. As for me, it was kind of moving out of the bubble, and this is a recommendation also to everyone. We certainly should follow the idea to move outside the bubble, find alliances in areas where we don't expect them. For instance, and that's the reason why I'm here, look at the gas industry.
Thank you.
Just one point. What wisdom? If renewable energy was cheaper than the energy from the coal power plants, would you say that that would be the way forward?
Perfectly. You know, Ghana used to rely mainly on hydro. And because of that, we had our aluminium plant, Valco, that was producing alumina. Our hydropower was giving us close to 3 cents per kilowatt hour. But today, we have outstripped the capacity of hydro. So if you have the hydro resources, which tends to give cheap power, then why not? You can stimulate it. But in a situation where you don't have adequate hydro potential, in a situation where you have the other resources, and I keep on mentioning coal, most coal, Germany takes coal from South Africa. Coal is available in Africa, but you cannot use it, but you can export it for it to be used. That is where the imbalance is, and I think that we have to look at it. And above all, I want to use this platform to appeal. If renewable is the solution for Africa, let's get our missions to walk the talk. It will be a pride to see the German embassy in Ghana, to be proud to say I'm even 50% renewable dependent. Not even go to 100%, just 50%. We'll all see it, we'll see the good works and follow. But where you are using diesel to run your power plant, and you say, don't use diesel, use solar for yours. I have a problem with that.
Fair enough. Any final comments from anyone else here? Okay, thank you, everyone. Oh, no, sorry, Irene, one more. Closing word to the lady.
No, thank you very much. I just want to come back to one thought that was already formulated in various ways during our discussion, and that is that renewable energy and a future consistent with a path of warming under or at 1.5 degrees is not a technological question alone. It is a question of social justice. It is a question of leaving no one behind. It's a question of liberty and democracy at the end of the day. And I would like to encourage us all to seize the opportunities that we have, each one of us, to move in that direction and to take as many of our fellow humans along on the walk. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now we're going to break through a coffee break until 11:15, so 11:15, and we're going to come back to our tables and we're going to carry on discussing exactly how can we do this? How can we move things forward as a community to ensure that everyone's brought along? Thank you so much to the panel and all of you. You've been awesome. Coffee back through there. Thank you.